the conversation about the what the Trump administration has been doing in regards to immigrants in this country, in regards to people from other countries more broadly, specifically refugees in this instance. Here is a news report from Canadian News, CBC. There is a court case, which is sort of fascinating. As you know, Donald Trump tried to, and I don't know exactly the status. I mean, I guess they're in Mexico, but he's trying to make it impossible, trying to make a safe country deal with, I think it was Guatemala he was trying to make it with. And I don't know if they've actually been able to close this deal. But the idea is that if you're coming from a country where there's some type of natural disaster, or it's very violent, or you are subject to political oppression, if you cross through a country which is a safe third country, as opposed to the country you start with and the country where you want to end up in, so let's say Honduras in America, a third country that is safe, and the second country, America, has the United States has a deal with the third country, let's say Guatemala, then you're not eligible to seek asylum in that second country, the United States. Well, the United States has a similar deal with Canada. Canada will not allow you to enter from America into Canada and claim refugee status because you are already in a safe country, ostensibly. There is a court case in Canada right now that is contesting that, largely on the grounds that it is no longer safe for refugees in the United States. Here is a report from CBC.
Safe third country agreement is being challenged in federal court this hour, and that agreement has to do with Canada's border pact with the United States that prohibits people from claiming asylum here if they cross the border at official entry points. At issue today, whether the U.S. is indeed still safe for asylum seekers. And for more, let's go to Habiba Noshin. She is standing outside the courthouse in Toronto, where proceedings are just about to get underway. So Habiba, nice to have you on the program. This is, I have to say, a controversial border agreement. Take us through the case and the arguments being made here.
So this agreement was essentially went into effect in 2004. And what it says is that when a claimant makes their way into the U.S., the second they step foot in it, that's where they'll be forced to make their claim. And then if they try to cross over to make their claim in Canada, they'll be sent back. Because the argument is that if a refugee is truly fearful of his or her life, they will be making their claim in the first safe place that they land or they arrive at. And what that agreement has essentially meant is it's closed the borders for a lot of asylum seekers who would perhaps want to make their way to Canada to access its court system for a refugee claim, but they're prevented from doing so under this agreement. So it's really stopped the flow of traffic from the U.S. to Canada in large numbers. So if this agreement was to be done away with, that we would likely see a lot of asylum seekers making their claim in Canada. And some argue that that might collapse the refugee system because we are able to maintain an orderly system here in Canada because the number of people who are eventually making their claim is quite limited because of this agreement that's in place with the U.S.
So quite limited, but
and at the center of the argument, yeah.
Sorry,
and
go
the
ahead.
reason being that the argument that the government has made is that the U.S. is a safe place and it's at par with the Canadian system for refugees, and therefore if you arrive in Canada or you arrive in the U.S., your chances are pretty good that you'll get a fair hearing. But the claimants are arguing today that that is in fact not the case, that especially given the events in recent years, that the U.S. Is no longer a safe country for refugees and that Canada should do away with this agreement.
And I think, I'm going to look into this more, but I think the issue is that question of whether you get a fair hearing. And if there is a blanket policy that continues to limit the reasons for asylum, you don't have the opportunity if you come in at the border, let's say, and a lot of people come into the border not just from Latin America, but they make their way over to Latin America. There's a story, and we'll cover this tomorrow, about an immigrant who died in ICE care, who came from Cameroon and had worked his way up through Central America, flown into, I can't remember exactly where it was, but worked his way up through Central America into the United States. But if you are rejected for asylum at the United States border because the United States no longer considers domestic abuse situations or gang violence situations as a legit reason for asylum, you don't have an opportunity to go to Canada because you've already been rejected at the United States. And so this is a problem.